my goal in listening is to make sure I get that exposure to the language. Hi there, Steve Kaufman here, and today I'm going to talk about listening. This is going to be the third in my series of my hierarchy of goals in language learning. Remember, if you enjoy these videos, please click on the bell for notifications. And if you follow me on a podcast service, please leave a comment. I do appreciate it. So you may remember that I said there are 7 goals that I have when it comes to language learning. And I kind of have a hierarchy of goals. My first goal is to acquire words. The number of words I know is the best indicator of my level in the language. My second goal was to read a lot, and I measure and I follow the statistic we have at Link on how many words I have read. Now, the third goal is listening. It's the third goal in the hierarchy, but in many ways, it's the most important because it's the major activity that I do when it comes to language learning, simply because it's so easy to do. So I can get up in the morning and listen. I can listen while doing the dishes. I listen while I exercise. I listen while I'm in the car or in the train or wherever I am. I can always listen. I can listen 15 minutes here, 20 minutes there. Before you know it, I have an hour of language learning done. The listening is how the brain gets used to the sounds of the language, gets used to the structure of the language. We, as human beings, we have been listening for a lot longer than we have been reading. And I think it's natural for the brain to learn a language through listening. The reading helps, and I said that in my earlier video, and I can reinforce that by saying that, in fact, if I look at my strategy in listening, so I sort of have 2 types of listening. When I start in a language, I need a lot of repetitive listening. That doesn't mean that I listen to, say, one mini story 30 times at one sitting, but it means that I'll listen to that story a couple of times, then I move to the second story, even while I don't really understand the first story that well. Again, remember, the brain wants novelty, repetition and novelty. As the great Manfred Spitzer said, we need them both. So I can listen to that first story 2 or 3 times, but at a certain point, even if I don't understand it, I want something new. And so typically I'll go lesson 1, a few times lesson 2, lesson 3, lesson 4, back to lesson 1. And eventually I'll end up listening to that first story 20, maybe 10, 20 times. In fact, it'll end up being more than that because the mini stories are kind of the sort of the gym, I like to call it. That's where I work on my core capability in the language. So even much later in the language, when I have acquired a lot more words, I still like to go back to listening to the mini stories because I always discover things that I hadn't noticed before. In other words, things that I'm now open to because I've learned other things in the language. So I start to notice them. Remember too, again, when it comes to, because in listening, I don't really have a goal. I want to listen to so many hours. I just want to listen. It's easy to do. I do it. Whether that's 100 hours, 200 hours, I don't pay the same amount of attention to the total number of hours I've listened to as I do to the reading or the sort of, linking and adding to my known words total. Because the listening, I'm just going to do it. And but it's important to realize that when you listen, it's not important, or you shouldn't think you need to understand everything. You don't even have to focus all the time when you're listening. It's just getting the language in you. And so my goal in listening is to make sure I get that exposure to the language. It's not to make sure I understand anything. With enough listening, the comprehension will come. Particularly if I have access. Now, the mini stories are relatively simple and there's a lot of repetition. But as you graduate from the mini stories to more difficult content, you aren't listening as often. You're encountering more words that you don't know. And so there, I think it's very important to recognize that it may be frustrating that you don't understand, and make sure you have access to transcript, because to listen to something that you totally don't understand, I don't think is very useful. But if you have access to the transcript and you can look up the words on Link Say and you listen again, it may seem that every time you listen, you still don't understand the same parts. And I have that experience all the time. However, if you keep going, you will gradually understand more and more. And I've had that experience many, many times. With more difficult content, my strategy typically is to listen and to cover the material in the sentence mode, so that with timestamps I can listen to the sentence. And even there, the same words, the same phrases, I don't understand them. I can't pick them up. It goes too quickly. It doesn't matter. Gradually, you will understand more. And I've had that experience. So the goal in listening is to make sure you listen enough that the brain will eventually get used to it. And make sure you have access to the transcript so that you can actually read it and have a chance of understanding what you're listening to. You may still not understand it, but you're gradually building up to that better level of comprehension. And listening comprehension is such an important goal because it's the condition. Once you have that listening comprehension, you can watch movies, you can listen to podcasts, you can engage in meaningful conversation with people. So, and all of those activities, the sort of higher level activities, are going to improve your ability to speak, which is where we eventually want to end up. But that listening is such a key part. And in terms of time, it's where I spend most of my time. Between my different opportunities to listen during the day, I easily get in an hour, and then I only need another half hour or so of reading and linking if I'm using link. And I've got my hour and a half a day of language learning time in. So listening is the easiest thing to do. It's very important for forming new habits in the brain, for getting you to notice phrases that you will eventually want to use. It's the best preparation for speaking. So while I don't track the number of hours that I listen, but I can leave you, again, from my profile, just in a couple of languages, the extent to which my listening activity has, grown progressively. But it's so key to do it. And even if you stop for a while, when you go back to listening, all of that listening activity that you have done that has created new language habits in your brain, it'll still be there. You might, have forgotten a few words, but as you relearn these words and as you listen to it again, you'll be back stronger than ever. So make sure you invest enough time in your listening activities. And in the next video, I will talk about how all of our input activity gradually leads us to being able to speak well and what my goals are when it comes to speaking. So, thank you for listening.